Well, excuse me everyone, may I have your attention? Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to all of you. I am Deni Friawan, the moderator of today's discussion forum. I'm very pleased to see you all and welcome to the first Indonesian Synergy and PPIA discussion forum for this semester. Today, we would like to discuss about the prospect and challenge for the new elected presidential, economic and social demographics perspective. This issue is an important issue given the fact that we just finished our presidential election and we will have new government in the next coming months. For discussing those issues, we have now Dr. Ariane Utomo and Dr. Arianto Patunru. Welcome, Mas Aco, Mbak Arin. Dr. Utomo is a research fellow at the Crawford Public School. She received her PhD in demography from ANU in 2008, while Dr. Patunru is a fellow at the ANU Department of Economics and Policy, and he also policy engagement coordinator of Indonesian project at CAPS. He was previously the head of Institute for Economic and Social Science, LPM FAUI. He holds a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, United States. Without further ado, let's start our discussion. We start from ladies to under ladies. The floor is yours, Mbak.
Facing the forthcoming Jokowi administration from a socio-demographic perspective. Of course, first and foremost, this is based on the assumption that Prabowo would lose his challenge in the economy. But beside that, I thought Jokowi has a nice rhyme with demography and democracy. So it's a good title, I think. Okay. Do you all speak Bahasa Indonesia in the room?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, I'm going to start off by going back to an online media report that cited Tantowi Yahya. For those of you who don't know Tantowi is a celebrity politician who had been quite an active spokesperson for the Prabowo-Hatta camp during the election. So in the last round of the televised debates between the two camps, JK pointed out that Hatta Rajasa got the two different environmental awards mixed up. And the media was quick to pick up Hatta's blunder. But in defending Prabowo-Hatta, Tantowi argued that the media should have focused instead on a bigger blunder, he said, made by Yusuf Kala, who he alleged had failed to understand the difference between bonus demographic bonus, dan bonus democratic bonus. So moving forward from that particular quote, I would like to structure my talk around these three key points. I will begin by very briefly outlining demographic transition theory, changing age structure, the notion of the demographic bonus, and what this means for Jokowi's upcoming administration. I will then highlight key findings from a relatively small amount of literature looking at the relationship between demographic transition on one hand and transition to democracy on the other. So the first two parts of my talks are centered on these theories that frame the bigger picture of the kind of challenges coming ahead for Jokowi and his team. But in the last part of my talk, I will give a practical example of one of the many challenges that I think should be urgently addressed by Jokowi's administration, and that is the importance of having reliable and valid estimates of the population. Is there any other demographers in the room? Oh, okay. And Hasnani. So to understand bonus demography in Indonesia, it's useful to have a quick review of the concept of demographic transition. In a nutshell, basically, the demographic transition is a model, or it's a theory, describing the transition from high mortality and high fertility to low fertility and low mortality. And this occurs as part of the economic development and social change of a particular country. And much of Indonesia's demographic transition occurred through the last decades of the last century. So we've pretty much completed the first stage of the demographic transition. One of the consequences of the demographic transition is the effect of mortality and fertility decline on the changing age structure of the population. So you could see the changes in the age structure of the Indonesia's population in this particular chart. The most evident long-term changes are, first, you could see that the proportion of young children have declined. The proportion of the working age population is increasing between 1961 and 2035. So I'm adding up the two blue bars together. And the proportion of the elderly is gradually increasing between the decades, between 1961 and 2035. Changing age structure has profound implications on the dependency ratio of the population. So we could see how, while the share of the young and the old are relatively getting smaller and smaller to the size of the working age population. And the demographic bonus, or the demographic dividend, refers to this long-term decrease in the dependency ratio driven by fertility decline. Now, Jokowi won the presidential election at a very good time, population age structure-wise, right? The dependency ratio in Indonesia has been steadily falling over the last 40 or so years, and we expect that such trend will continue over in the next 2 decades. Now, given that the time at which the ratio would reach its lowest points can be seen to be fast approaching, that particular point there, this period of low dependency has been identified as representing a window of opportunity. So it presents an opportunity because the load on the working age population will start to increase again around this time. And this will increase because of population aging. So in a way, to me, there is, did I pick it up? Hello? Sorry, it's
From Prabowo.
From Virgin Australia. So for me, in a way, there's added pressure for Jokowi to implement effective policies in place to exploit this so-called demographic window of opportunity, so we can support the needs for the increasing demographic load that is to come. I will not go through what strategic policy areas that need to be addressed, for the reason that they are pretty much the usual suspects, right? Human capital, including both education and health, social protection, creation of decent and meaningful work for the increasing pool of labor supply that corresponds to the increase in the size of the working age population, and addressing the issues of youth idleness and AET stands for young people who are neither in employment, education, and training. And these have been the focus of discussion in the recent campaign. So that was the first big challenge. Now let's move on to the second theoretical perspective, which looks at how does this changing age structure that we talked about in the previous section has anything to do with transition to democracy at all. There are quite a number of exciting recent scholarly work looking at the relationship between the changing age structure on one hand and the democratic transition process on the other. One scholar like Richard Tinkota, for example, have used a demographic projection technique to identify countries that are likely to experience a population age structure conducive to liberal democracy. So the definition of liberal democracy is the one commonly used by institutions like the Freedom House. Others have also used age structure as a predictor. So they run multivariate regression models of liberal democracy or regime change. Now, the change in age structure as a predictor or as an explanatory variable for different measures of democracy can be expressed through different variables. The most common are median age, the percent of young men aged 15 to 29. There's another measure called the relative cohort size. And the other measure, the last measure that I'm familiar with, is one that is called the youth bulk proportion. The underlying idea expressed in these theories is that a youthful age structure may reflect the vulnerability of a large cohort of unemployed young men or youth who are quite vulnerable to extremist ideology. So that's the main proposition of these theories. So the main hypotheses are that as the country becomes demographically mature, the likelihood that it will become a liberal democracy increases. And similarly, democracy with larger proportion of young males are more likely to become dictatorships than countries with smaller percent of male youths. So this is the hypothesis of democratic breakdowns. But rather than arguing for causality, when I looked at the literature, I think the underlying ideas of these studies is that demographic transition and democratic development are associated with each other rather than having pure causality, and they both reflected advances in human society. So it captures the bigger changes in economic development and social change. So I got this data from the World Population Prospects. So what I've done is basically I selected a couple of countries that I'm interested in and compare their median age. Indonesia is the red line. I put random things like Iran there, for example, for the reason that one of my colleagues is working on Iran, and we have a special project on the demography of Iran here at the Crawford School. Okay, so one interesting observation drawn by Richard Tinkota, the political demographer, is the age structural maturity hypothesis, where he finds a historical correlation between the median age of countries and their Freedom House scores. And he observed that older population tend to have more liberal regimes, while the opposite is true for younger population. He observed, so I quote, "No monarch had survived without some limits of power being introduced after countries reach a median age of 35, and military rulers too never passed that particular mark." So, of course, there are outliers. As you know, the case of Thailand, China, and Singapore are exceptions to these. So 35 is apparently the median age to look out for, and we are not quite there yet. At the moment, I think the median age for Indonesia is about 28, 29, and yeah, it's really interesting to see whether his hypothesis will hold. Another nice graphical representation of this idea is Cinquotta's quite simple cross-charting between the proportion of young adults in the working age population on one axis, here represented by the blue bars, and country's freedom house scores on the other, here represented by the line. So, although there are clear outliers like Thailand on this particular panel, in general he observed that for relatively youthful countries, there is a 50% chance of being rated a liberal democracy once its young adult proportion drops to 0.4. And Indonesia is just here. We're just slightly above 0.4. So basing from A, results of these studies on the historical associations between age structure and democratic stability, and B, the current age profile of the Indonesian population, there is indeed a good chance of what some people might call a democratic reversal. So we're not quite there yet. It's cliche, but it's a challenge for the new government to continue promoting democracy and a just and tolerant society. So this brings me to my last section. In the first round of the televised debate, Jokowi and JK were pretty clear that their strategic focus is to develop an effective system of government. So bahasa Indonesia very micro. Bagaimana membangun sistem, memperbaiki program, dan mengubah perilaku masyarakat. I think that's the right focus. And let me illustrate with this particular example. So for those of you who don't speak Bahasa Indonesia, the title is a quote that has been mentioned over and over again in the past week since July 22nd. This is the phrase that has been repeated over and over by Prabowo, in that the election was riddled with massive, structured, and systematic fraud. So when we don't know for sure how many people live in every province and districts in Indonesia, and when we don't know for sure their age, their education characteristics, we will be likely to run into problems like, when we try to construct budgets for development planning, for example, when we try to effectively target our social protection program, and as this example is trying to show, it'll be difficult for anyone to have a benchmark when we want to assess whether the data on registered voters were in fact reliable, accurate source. Right? So ultimately what we have right now is a situation whereby the legitimacy of the election is being questioned by Prabowo and his supporters. I'm going to compare 3 data sources. The first one is the population census. This is the official estimates of the population released by Badan Pusat Statistik, so our Central Bureau of Statistics. The second one is the population register data. This is recently introduced by Depdagri, that's the Ministry for Home Affairs. And the last one is the data on registered voters. This data is managed by the General Election Committee, but they construct this database based on the data constructed by the Home Affairs Minister. So first, I'm going to compare the data in the census series and the data issued by the Population Registry of the Home Affairs Ministry. I refer to 4 data points, maybe even 5. So SP 2000 is Census Penduduk 2000, Population Census 2010, DDG is Depdagri Ministry of Home Affairs population registry data in 2013, population projections data in 2010, and population projection data in 2015. Population projection data are based on the census series. They are also released by the BPS. The difference between the 2010 population census and the projection data on 2010 is that the BPS has made some slight adjustments based on the under enumeration of the population. So the story in many provinces is that the data from the population registered suggests that we have many more people in 2013, so looking at the blue bars, compared to what has been projected by the BPS to be the case in 2015, which is that last bar. But on the other hand, we also have provinces where you get less people accounted for in 2013 relative to the 2010 census figures. So these are for provinces like Jawa Barat and Banten. Although I'm pretty sure that we're not experiencing any kind of population declines in these provinces. So because the population registers paints a distinctively different picture of the population compared to the census series, we are faced with this picture of different rates of annual population growth according to the different data series. So if you look at Banten and Jawa Barat, right, the green and the yellow dots represent negative population growth rates when we use two data points, which is the census 2010 and the population data, population registered data. And this is a very different trend to the estimates of growth rates when we use the census and the population projection series. So negative growth rates for these provinces. So this is 0 here. But on the other hand, if you look at Papua Barat, Papua, Sulawesi, West Sulawesi, when we use the 2010 census and the 2013 registers to calculate the annual growth rate, you get crazy annual population growth rate, 10% in the case of Papua and Papua Barat. So because I don't know at this stage how to reconcile the two data sources, so ignoring the KPU, I don't know how to reconcile population census and population register, I can't really say that I'm happy about the data on registered voters either. When I look at the data from the BPS population projection by province for population in 2014, the share of population age 15 and over is about 72%. So when you think about that, you would expect that the share of people who can vote, I think it's age 17 up, yeah. The percentage should be less than 72. But when I plug in the number of total registered voters as a proportion of the projected population in 2014, I get 78, 79. So I don't know what's happening. So at the moment, I can't say whether there is indeed kecurangan yang masif, terstruktur, dan sistematis. Right? I don't know whether there is a massive structured and systemic fraud in the election happening, or whether we just have crap data everywhere. And I think this is the homework before the next election comes around. How am I going for time, Mas Deni?
You still have
A little bit more, just one last one. So to conclude, there are different ways in which we could examine the winning of Jokowi JK from socio-demographic perspective. We could look at the demographic explanation why Jokowi won on one hand, but on the other hand, we could also look at some evidence-based speculations on what are the challenges to their administration from a demographic perspective. So today I only have time to outline the 3 challenges that I listed there in green, and I hope these ideas will spark a productive discussion in the forum. So thank you so much. So if you want to copy of the